Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Marc Gingras, who's a tech entrepreneur, angel investor, former CEO, and now serves as the Senior Vice President of Employee Experience Strategy at Workforce Software. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us before the holidays. I've caught you. Are you excited to just relax and enjoy the time off?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to spending time with the family.
Nice. Before we jump into today's podcast, tell everyone a little bit more about you, and your journey to kind of where you are now at Workforce Software.
Yeah, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and my mission in life has always been to try to make enterprise software look and feel like consumer software. And so, I've had a stint of building messaging applications that were used, implemented by BlackBerry. BlackBerry was one of the companies that acquired my previous company when BlackBerry was actually something.
Those kids listening now is like, what's that?
Yeah, what's a BlackBerry, right? What do you mean? There was a keyboard on it? I don't get that. And then from there, moved on to building Foco, which was basically a tool to help organizations better communicate with their frontline team. Because I think when you look at statistics, there's so much investment that are made in enterprise software for desk workers. But the frontline workers are kind of left behind. They're the seasonal people. They're usually paid less than a desk worker. And so there's not a lot of investment that's made from a technology, but they're the biggest part of the workforce out there. And so that's what we start to address. And then in May of 2021, we joined Workforce through an acquisition, and that just now propels us to really create what we call the modern workforce. And so that's a bit of my journey. And like I said, my mission has always been, let's try to create an experience for people using the app that feels like a consumer app, but gives everything that you need from an enterprise software.
Yeah. What led just out of interest, one entrepreneur to another? Was it just out of frustration? Like, what made you go down this? Was you just frustrated by using the different software and tools? And you're like, there's got to be a better way. Like, what was the main reason behind it?
I don't know if it's frustration. More like I like to build stuff that I want to use personally.
Okay.
And I don't want to compare myself to Steve Jobs because he's in a league by his own. But he built the iPod because he liked to listen to music, and he made it sure that the sound was super crisp and all that. I'm a bit the same thing when it comes to messaging and communication. I want it to be super simple that I would want to use it. So it's more out of, let's build something that I want to use, and then hopefully other people will want to use it as well.
Today we're going to be talking about employee experience for the modern workforce. I think the word employee experience has definitely changed over the last 18 months, the meaning of it. And so I wanted to kind of start the conversation by asking you, how do you define employee experience?
I mean, in a broad sense, it's from the first contact of someone that's going to join a company to the end contact, and how do you treat that employee through that entire cycle, from the first interview to the hiring, the onboarding, to while they're doing their work, while they're being promoted, while they're managing people. How do you treat this entire thing to the exit interview, and how do you treat them once they leave? That's, ultimately, so it's not something that just needs to be managed by HR anymore. It's actually something that needs to be managed by everyone. When you think about it that way, you may feel like, oh crap, I need to start boiling the ocean. Like, where do I spend my time? And where I spent a lot of cycle is like, okay, how do we make it simpler for people to understand, and also for us to build tools that make sense? And fundamentally, the employee experience to me comes to, how do you communicate with your team throughout their entire process? So fundamentally to me it's a communication method. And oftentimes what I see is organizations think of communication as a separate silo. It's like something that sits on the side, and then you've got your other tools that you're using, and then you have your communication tool. But if you really want to create a solid employee experience, how do you bake in communication across the entire platform of tools that you're using to interact with your people? And so fundamentally, to answer your question, To me, when I think about employee experience, it's about communication.
Not to ask an obvious question, but for our audience listening, they know the answer, but I'll answer it anyway. But why is employee experience so important?
It actually has a huge impact on your top line and your bottom line. Ultimately, you'll have a healthier business if you do that. I mean, there's statistics that show, I think it was Jacob Morgan. He wrote a book. It's called The Employee Experience Advantage. And in there, he analyzed 252 companies. And of those, only 6% really did a great job of the employee experience throughout the cycle of an employee. And those 6% ended up being 4 times more profitable and having 40% lower turnover. So when you think about that, if you do manage to create this right employee experience, it has a huge impact on your business. And we can talk about improving productivity. We can talk about improving revenue, profit, all that stuff. Basically, your organization is healthier because your employees are happier. You take better care of your customers. Your customers are happier. They'll spend more with you. So it's a huge cycle that has a huge impact on your business.
Yeah. Were you surprised by that number that so many companies are falling short?
I wouldn't say surprised.
Maybe it's the wrong word, but was it?
Yeah, it's definitely low. And
very low. Yeah.
It's very low. And even if you survey the employees themselves, their perceptions of how their company are doing from an employee experience is very low. Only 12% of employees out there believe that their companies are doing an adequate or good job when it comes to employee experience. So that's very low. But if you survey companies specifically and you ask the leaders, they're saying at 60%, 70%, they're saying, yeah, we're doing a good job from an employee experience standpoint.
Yeah.
So there's a huge disconnect between what the companies perceiving versus what the employees are perceiving. And so how do you help bridge that gap so that at least 60-70% of employees and companies actually are doing a good job from an employee experience? That's the challenge.
Yeah. Where do you see the common areas that employees are constantly falling short?
Employee experience, and when you think about communication, an employee will be engaged in a company if they have a very strong relationship with their line manager. And oftentimes I see organizations focused on trying to communicate directly to the end employee, when actually they should spend a lot of time taking care of the line manager, because they're the ones that need to really take care of their team and their team members, because that's where the relationship, that's where the bond happens. And if you have that strong bond, that's where it kind of makes sense. And so this is where I see a lot of companies kind of failing. And then the other part that I also see as a challenge is oftentimes organizations try to do one size fits all. They look at their organization as a whole and there's this is how we're going to communicate across my entire organization. I think we need to take a page out of the playbook from a sales organization and marketing organization where they really segment their market
by personas.
Exactly, by personas, by segments, by all that stuff. And so they really segment that. You need to do the same thing for your employees. So not everybody has the same needs. It could even be by region. It could be by demographic. It could be by role.
You think about generations as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Generation X is very different than the millennials, and their needs are very different. So you need to really look at not doing a one size fits all. When you think about communication, you really need to segment it and really figure out what are the ways that I need to better communicate with them. And maybe there's different tools that you need to have. Maybe a generation may be fine with going to get the information when they need it, and they don't want to be bombarded with information when they don't want it. Well, others want a constant stream of information to be sent to them, right? So they feel engaged and appreciated and so on. So those are, I think, the two things to consider.
Yeah. And you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, but a big conversation now is who owns this? Is that something you looked at in the data?
Yeah. And oftentimes, you'll see HR saying, oh, we're responsible for employee experience. I think they can be the catalyst and they can be kind of the orchestrator, but it's owned by everyone. Senior leadership, the line managers, they own the employee experience because that's who they interact with the most. It's not sending a nice newsletter once a week or once a month that engages your employees. Not at all. And so to me, the ownership is across the entire organization. It really needs to be part of your DNA, and companies that do it well get that.
No, you're right. Because as you said, the employee experience mainly goes down to that relationship with their line manager and the team. And that's not something HR can't own those individual conversations as well. Yes. And then, which is why they need to spend their time and energy focusing on those leaders and those managers instead of some of the other areas as well. Those companies that do it well, were there some common traits that stood out of things that they do very well
So they spend a lot of time training their line managers and also creating ways that they can collaborate between each other and do like best practice sharing. So on the training side of things, they do regular training about how to communicate with your frontline team members. How do you make sure that they're evaluated properly? How do you make sure that their tasks are being tracked? How do you treat them in certain scenarios, whether they're going on long-term disability or, so there's a lot of training and attention that's being put on those line managers so that they're the ones then being the vehicle of what that experience is to the frontline team. The other part that I see is when you think about your frontline team, you really want to create an experience for them that matters. And you want to reach out to them when it actually matters to get their feedback. So we see a lot of organization, everybody does surveys these days, right? There's like, hey, I want to get a pulse on this. And they send it out to everybody and everybody answers it. It's like, oh, okay, now we've got the source of truth. This is what our organization thinks. But I think that's a fallacy because ultimately they're getting information of people that really didn't care about the question sometimes, or they're not in the moment. So the ability to do surveys to the right people when it actually matters to get the real feedback is also a very important component of it.
An example of that be when companies were checking in on people during sort of lockdown, saying, how are you feeling? That's
a really great example. Or it could be someone's doing a lot of overtime. Send me a question about how I feel about overtime when I'm actually doing it. Right. Yeah. As opposed to, 2 months ago, I had to do a lot of overtime, but it's 2 months ago. And now I'm a month later and I don't think about it. Or let me know how I feel about mat leave when I'm about to go on mat leave or when I just came back from mat leave. Those are the moments that I really will have an opinion on it, as opposed to 2 years after the event or several months after the event where you're no longer in that moment. So surveying your people when it actually matters makes sense. Mm-hmm.
It comes back to that personalized experience again, right? And we Absolutely. Do again, and once again, we do that very often with our customers during the actual moments that matter. We reach out, we may pay attention to those moments as well. And people will remember that as well, right? If you know that you're doing loads of overtime and you see that the organizations recognize that and they're like, how are you feeling? Like, oh, okay, they do see it as well. So there's going to be a lot more engagement in that. They're going to give you the honest opinion because it's in the moment. Yeah, mm-hmm. so many benefits.
And that could also be extended to training, because when you think about training, a lot of organizations, they do like once a year training on different subjects or twice a year. And when you actually need it, you kind of forgot the training that you got. And so if the organization can figure out when the training makes sense, so yes, you do your normal training, but there's refreshers that are sent when it makes sense. So if I'm about to be given a task to do something, performance evaluations, I don't know, and it's coming down, well, give me training just before that task happens so that I'm up to speed, so that when I'm actually doing the task, I feel equipped to be able to do it. And so doing training when it matters. Communication when it matters, surveys when it matters. So the communication it matters, which is a different tangent. Sometimes there's tools that can be created, and this is where we spend a lot of time from a technology provider, is how can you use technology to facilitate the line manager to create a relationship with their frontline team. And so part of that is identifying moments where the line manager should reach out to their team to say, hey, how do you feel about this? Or are you doing all right? So for example, we talked about the overtime. Hey, how do you feel about doing the overtime? Do you need to swap? Or, hey, you just came back from long-term disability. Is there anything I can do with you? But having the system prompt the line manager to say, hey, reach out to Bob.
Those sort of nudges.
Bob,
yeah.
Right. It nudges, right? So Bob just came back, reach out to Bob to see how he feels about it. So those are things that technology can help create these better experiences.
Yeah. And as a manager as well, it's like you want to do those things, but you kind of just get caught up in everyday work, and we're human. It's impossible to keep track of all of those things. And that's where technology can come into play, right? And just nudge you and be like, Chris, have you checked in with Ivan to see how he is? Or, like all of those things. Or so-and-so just got back from maternity leave, maybe check in and see how she's getting on. So yeah,
exactly.
That's where I get really excited about technology and the role that it plays in organizations.
And this is where, I mentioned earlier when we had the conversation, communication is not a silo anymore. It's not like a side thing. It needs to be integrated with your time and attendance. It needs to be integrated with your scheduling. It needs to be integrated with the different tools that your task management, your different tools that you're using, so that these tools can feed data to help create these moments that will matter with your employees.
It's a big problem you come across, because I speak to so many organizations. They've got like 15 different apps. They've got Slack, they've got WhatsApp, they've got email, they've got Zoom, they've got Teams, they've got the list goes on, and they're getting messages from all different areas. And like how you tie that, and you've even got, I saw an article on LinkedIn how there's some research around employees are just using they're just finding their own means of communication that aren't even linked to our own IT systems and infrastructure, and they're just using their own tools because they're so fed up of all of the chaos of the systems that are internally. Is that something you come across?
Absolutely. So we see two spectrums, actually. There's a spectrum of people have way too many tools. They're using an intranet, they're using email, they're using text messaging, they're using a Teams or whatever they're using to communicate. And so people don't know where to go anymore to get the right information. And then on the flip side, you've got organizations where you have people that are in the dark, where they don't get any information. And what you see in this aspect is they end up going on public systems to get the information that they're wanting. And, one example that we saw of a company that eventually became a customer is one of the largest pharmacy in the US. And they had their employees right in the beginning of the pandemic go on Reddit, go on Facebook to say, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. I have a bit of a cough. Am I supposed to come in? Am I not supposed to come in? Like, what are the protocols? Nobody's communicating with me. I feel unsafe. And so that was vetted outside in a public system, but really they were trying to communicate internally to get the answers, but they had no vehicle to do that. And so that's why this organization ended up turning to us and then implemented an application that looked and feel like a consumer app for communication. And now they at least had a forum to ask those questions and get the answers that they needed so that they felt safe to come into work or not. So definitely we're seeing those two spectrums. Either you're bombarded with way too many tools and you need to consolidate, or you don't have anything and then you're going to public systems, and that's actually a huge liability for organizations. The other interesting aspect, and I'm going on left field here, but the other interesting aspect was that the pandemic really put the forefront the need for flexibility. Right, where people wanted or feel and want a different flex environment. And so, it's easier for desk workers to figure out, hey, I want a flex environment, or I want a hybrid, I want to work from home, or I want to come into the office. And that's easier because they're sitting at a desk and it's easier to, but for deskless workers, that typically people that are working in a manufacturing plant or working on a shop floor or driving a truck, and how do you give them that flexibility that you need? And so implementing tools that they can better suggest what is the schedule that they would like, allowing for better swapping of shifts between different individuals, creating this infrastructure to give them the flexibility that they need or that they want is also a very important part of creating a good employee experience.
And that's where your company came into play, right? Which makes sense of the collaboration and the partnership with Workforce Software.
Exactly. And then communication of it as well, right? So it's no longer just about clocking in and clocking out anymore and knowing what my schedule is, but allowing this communication to happen as we do it, so that if I'm clocking in late all the time, it's maybe, and I'm not used to be someone that clocks in, let my line manager know to reach out to me to say, maybe there's something wrong. Maybe I need some help about something, right? And so it makes me feel more engaged. And so what we're doing, and this is kind of the partnership, was bringing in a communication layer that is embedded into your time and attendance, into your scheduling, into your task management, so that it really feels like a unified experience.
Yeah. And also that's also how you help people feel a part of the culture as well and integrate it, because there became this sort of us and them mentality, and that was even more highlighted during the pandemic, where you got people, blue collar workers, no idea what's going on, because they're not checking in. They're on the shop floor, they're in the manufacturing site, they're driving, they're not checking in the intranet and the latest news and what's happening. There was so many companies that I spoke to that were just left vulnerable, or realized, oh wow, we don't have anything in place to communicate with our employees who aren't in an office or, you know, working at a desk as well, which was shocking to see, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had organizations that had like intranets where they could post a message to everybody in the organization, but it was a one size fits all.
Again, yeah.
And so
then no one reads it because it's even relevant to me. So
exactly right. Yeah. So now, like there is a need in the ability to broadcast messages to the different people on the device that they're using every single day is actually very important, but also broadcast message to people that are relevant for me.
Yeah.
Like if I live on the East Coast and there is, I don't know, an earthquake on the West Coast, do I really need to know that? Like, does it affect my work? Yeah. Okay. Maybe I want to know about it, but I don't need to know all the protocols I need to follow, because I'll be like, why do I need to follow these protocols? Oh no, it's not applicable to me. So really targeting the right message to the right people when it makes sense. I think that is also very important. That's the underlying, let's not create a one size fits all, really target the message to who gets what.
What would you say as well, for everyone listening, to some of the signs of a bad employee experience, some of the symptoms?
Yeah. So high employee turnover, short tenure, like people not staying long, people not referring other employees, like new employees. I think that those are really tell signals of a very bad employee experience, because if people are engaged and happy, they will let everybody know about it and try to attract other like-minded individuals, and also people will not want to leave their work. So I think that those are kind of the tell signals that I would focus on first.
Yeah. What about things like burnout?
Yeah, that's definitely, like, the mental health, I think is very important to take into consideration. But on that one, it's interesting to look at, like, what is the role of the organization versus what's happening overall. I think, we've all have been understrained quite a bit over the last couple of years with the pandemic. And so I think it's just normal that those numbers kind of come up. Now, what the question is, how do companies deal with it, and how do individuals feel about how the company is dealing with it? So this is where surveys, when it matters, kind of make sense. It's like, yeah, these numbers are going to come up anyways, but maybe surveying the people, say, are we taking care of you the way you would want to be taken care of in this situation?
Last thing before I let you go, what was your kind of key takeaway from the research?
To me, is when you think about employee experience, it's not just fluff in the air. It's not just like kumbaya. It's actually, there's actionable things that you can do, like taking care of your line managers, like making sure that your employees are not a one size fits all, and that you're really segmenting that. And then if you manage to create this right employee experience, it has an impact on your business. your revenues will be better, your customer satisfaction will be higher. So ultimately your turnover is going to be lower. So you'll see a huge impact on your business when you start paying attention to creating that right employee experience.
Amazing. And as always, everyone, the link's already below. So get the link in the comment section below or the description, wherever you're watching or listening. In the description will be a link directly to the report. So make sure you go download that now. It's free. Make sure you also forward it on to your colleagues that you feel would gain value as well. And there's so many great insights in there as well. But look, apart from that, thanks for joining me on the show. We've spoken before. I know you've been working like crazy for this year. So take some time, relax, enjoy the holidays.
Same to you. Happy holidays, and we'll talk in the new year.
Yeah, no worries. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.